Today we'll be taking a look at a computer case, the TU150. I'll cover some of the features of the case and then we'll do a build in it. So stick around. Welcome back to Machines and More. I'm so glad you're joining me today. Today, I'm taking you through the Lian Li TU150. The TU150 is a Mini-ITX case made out of aluminum, exterior aluminum. Now, it doesn't quite qualify as a small form factor case, since it's over 20 liters at about 24 liters. But those are just semantics. No, though it's not in the realm of smaller cases like the N-Case M1, it's still a very compact case that is able to hold most mainstream components. If you like uncompromised air cooling in a smaller case, this is one to consider. It comes in a black or silver brushed aluminum finish with a tempered glass side panel. All panels are toolless and pop right out. As far as cooling goes, the TU150 appears to be designed for air cooling. It will take up to a 165mm tall air cooler, which is tall enough for coolers even up to a Noctua D15. I'll be building with a Noctua U12S here shortly. Water cooling, as I'll discuss later on, is highly compromised by the limited radiator mounting space. The 120mm intake fan with one dust filter is located behind the front panel, along with a corresponding 120mm exhaust at the rear of the case. There is room for cable management under the top panel, and only Mini-ITX or Mini-DTX boards are supported, along with SFX power supplies. For the front I/O panel, we have a power button, a USB-C with 3.1 Gen 2 support, two USB 3.0 USB-A ports, a mic, a headphone jack, and finally a reset button. The brushed finish is a lovely touch that really shows off the quality of the unit. For this build, I'm going with the 12-core, 24-thread AMD Ryzen 9 3900X on an ASUS X570 ITX Strix motherboard. I'm pairing it with the ASUS Strix 5700 XT GPU and 32GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 RAM. For the power supply, I'll be using the EVGA GM 650W SFX power supply. And for cooling, I am going with the Noctua U12S air cooler, while pairing it with two Noctua NF-A12 fans for ventilation. Lastly, for drives, I'll be using the Samsung 970 M.2 NVMe drive. Let's get building. it's all built up and ready to rock. Building in this case was fairly straightforward, although cable management was a little tricky under the top and behind the side panels. You might also notice I took off the NF-F12 fan and from the heatsink and swapped it to the front as an intake, moving the NF-A12 over to the heatsink because the noise levels are a little better. We'll talk specific thermal and cooling optimization in a future video, but thermals and noise levels were just okay. Running a few benchmarks, the 3900X saw about a 50 to 55 degree delta over ambient at highest while on PBO. The GPU did run a bit hotter than I would have expected despite the huge heatsink on this card. As much as 60 degrees over ambient when running Unigen Heaven. I think the lack of airflow and limited intake on the bottom does limit the cooling ability. So, what do I think of this case? Well, let's break it down into the following categories. The first category is material, and that covers items like build quality, the aesthetics, and also the general appearance. For that, I give this case 18 out of 20. This is a high quality case with high build quality. The brushed aluminum exterior is very attractive and hides fingerprints well. Obviously, the black version will show prints a little bit more. The tinted tempered glass panel and the concealment of the PSU and cables is pretty well thought out. It's better built and the metal is more attractive than the NZXT H210, which I've also worked with, while being lower and slightly narrower. The next category is assembly, and this covers the ease of build, the cable management, and space efficiency. For that, this case gets 15 out of 20. This case was easy to build in. The toolless panel removal and reassembly was much appreciated. Cable routing in the top and side panels wasn't as easy as I had thought it would be, since the cutouts for the side panel weren't that well thought out. The clearance was a little bit tight, especially in one of the holes for the side panel. Rubber grommets for the cutouts would have been nice also. In terms of space efficiency, this case is in an awkward spot. It's like the NZXT H210 in that it's not that much smaller than something like an MATX case. Now, I happen to have an older MATX case here for size reference, but just like the NZXT H210, it only takes ITX boards. But this one has another limitation. It only takes SFX power supplies, while not allowing the level of water cooling support that a slightly bigger case would support. The power supply mounting is really odd. There's all this wasted space underneath it. So if you don't mind, aesthetically this isn't a bad thing. It kind of has an open space that's pleasing. But moving the PSU mounting point to the front of the case and allowing the ventilation to be a bottom to top orientation, that would have made more sense from a space efficiency perspective. Now, in terms of component compatibility, which will cover I/O options, GPU support, air cooling support, water cooling support, and drive support, this case gets 22 out of 30. This USB-C header on the case is a very nice touch, even though I did not have a USB front I/O header on this Strix X570 ITX board. For those of you with the Crosshair Impact 8 or the newer B550 ITX boards that have a USB-C front header, or an Intel ITX board, this will come in very handy. GPU support is pretty much as good as it gets, even though it's a little bit tricky to install. This Strix GPU is on the larger end of the spectrum, and there is a specific way to get it in. Taking advantage of an empty front fan mount, you can slide it into the slot. Now, 3-slot cards are a bit of a compromise since there is limited fan space on the bottom. 2-slot cards with 2 bottom fans would be an ideal scenario. I love the air cooling support on this case. The big tower coolers will work in here, even though the 3900X, for the 3900X are not strictly necessary. I found the U12S works just fine, and also I'll be doing a future video with detailed thermal comparison. It's nice that the heatsink cover also fits in here too. This airflow direction works as long as you orient the airflow in the same direction. Here, the 3 fans, they work in tandem and pull air through the front and exhaust it through the back. Water cooling support is where this case is a huge letdown. Yes, it supports up to 220mm radiators, but the efficacy of a 120mm radiator means that higher powered CPUs are out. You could run the GPU with a hybrid GPU cooler and it would be adequate with a 120mm radiator. But for CPU cooling, this is just an awkward place. Pretty much the only reasonable way for higher powered CPUs is a custom loop. You could run a slim rad like an XSPC TX240 at the bottom along with slim fans for a custom loop and add a few 120mm radiators. It's not ideal though. This could have easily been solved by allowing vertical GPU mounting and letting the bottom serve as a mounting point for a 240 AIO. Another option would have been to ship the components upwards, since this case reserves this top area for the 3.5-inch drive. It's almost the same size as the NZXT H210, and the H210 takes a 240mm radiator at the front. Now, drive support is okay. You can have 2 drives, with one of them being a 3.5-inch one. But the way things are currently, that's not going to be a big issue for most people. I think that's adequate. Thermals is our next category, and for that, this case gets 15 out of 20. This covers cooling effectiveness, ventilation, and fan support. Now, I think air cooling is excellent in this case. This ventilation pattern makes a lot of sense due to the heatsink orientation. It works well in conjunction with the fan placement. I doubt a push-pull setup on the heatsink will be that much better. We'll test that in a future video. But since the case is already fairly streamlined in terms of airflow, probably not going to make a big difference. However, the GPU thermals with bigger cards, like this 3-slot card here, it's a little bit compromised. I do have a 2-slot card I'll be testing out along with bottom fans for the next video. I think the issue here is the tiny air gap at the bottom. Yes, the GPU is going to pull air in, but it's going to help to have this bottom area opened up. Again, I think that the drive placement is what really hurt this case. It's compromised in order to allow this 3.5-inch drive, which it's 2020 and it doesn't make that much sense. Fan support is just okay, with 4 fan mounting points. There's 1 in the front, 1 in the back, and 2 in the bottom. I wish the bottom had a dust filter, because your GPU is going to take in air, and some people might be mounting fans on the bottom if they have a 2-slot card. The last category is special features, and for that, this case gets full points, 10 out of 10, because the single most special case on this case is this handle, which is a great feature even if you ever intend on moving your computer around. Now, I'm not talking about just going to LAN parties or getting on a plane or something like that. I'm talking about moving around your office or your home. This handle makes it very comfortable to lift the computer without having to hug it like some of us would without the handle. You'd have to hug it from the bottom. Overall, this case gets 80 out of 100. This is a great case, and I can easily recommend it to anyone who plans on air cooling their components. You could even run a hybrid GPU cooling system like the NZXT Kraken G12 with the 120 AIO, and then air cool your CPU. The build quality here is top-notch, and for me, unfortunately, the biggest downside is that you have to make a lot of compromises, and you don't gain too much in terms of a smaller size. So if you don't mind the dimensions, this is something I can easily recommend in its size segment. I hope you've enjoyed the build and review. Please, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to stay connected on future content, and definitely use the links down below if this case or any of the components I've reviewed today interest you. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next video.